Introduction of the Shining Gateway. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Andrea Fiore. The Shining Gateway by James Allen. Foreword. Students of the works of James Allen all over the world will welcome with joy another book from his able pen. In this work, we find the prophet of meditation in one of his deepest and yet most lucid expositions. How wonderfully he deals with fundamental principles. Here the reader will find no vague statements of generalities, for the writer enters with tender reverence into every detail of human experience. It is as though he came back to the shining gate, and standing there, he reviewed all the way up which his own feet have traveled, passing over no temptation that is common to man, knowing that the obstacles that barred his ascending pathway, or the clouds that at times obscured his vision, are the common experiences of all those who have set their faces towards the heights of blessed vision. As we read his words now, he seems to stand and beckon to us, saying, "Come on, my fellow pilgrims. It is straight ahead to the shining gateway. I have blazed the track for you." In sending forth this, another posthumous volume from his pen, we have no doubt but that it will help many and many an aspiring soul up to the heights, until at last they too stand within the shining gateway. Lily L. Allen, Ilfracombe, England. Behold the shining gateway, he who attaineth unto purity, the faultless Parthenon of truth doth use. Awake, disperse the dreams of self and sin. Behold the shining gateway, enter in. End of foreword. Recording by Andrea Fiore. Chapter 1 of The Shining Gateway by James Allen. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Andrea Fiore. Chapter 1. The Shining Gateway of Meditation. Be watchful, fearless, faithful, patient, pure. By earnest meditation sound the depths profound of life, and scale the heights sublime of love and wisdom. He who does not find the way of meditation cannot reach emancipation and enlightenment. The unregenerate man is subject to these three things: desire, passion, sorrow. He lives habitually in these conditions, and neither questions nor examines them. He regards them as his life itself, and cannot conceive of any life apart from them. Today he desires, tomorrow he indulges his passions, and the third day he grieves. By these three things, which are always found together, he is impelled, and does not know why he is so impelled. The inner forces of desire and passion arise almost automatically within him, and he gratifies their demands sans question. Led on blindly by his blind desires, he falls periodically into the ditches of remorse and sorrow. His condition is not merely unintelligible to him, it is perceived, for so far immersed is he in the desire or self-consciousness that he cannot step outside it, as it were, to examine it. To such a man, the idea of rising above desire and suffering into a new life where such things do not obtain seems ridiculous. He associates all life with the pleasurable gratification of desire, and so, by the law of reaction, he also lives in the misery of afflictions, fluctuating ceaselessly between pleasure and pain. When reflection dawns in the mind, there arises a sense, dim and uncertain at first, of a calmer, wiser, and loftier life, and as the stages of introspection and self-analysis are reached, this sense increases in clearness and intensity, so that by the time the first three stages are fully completed, A conviction of the reality of such a life and of the possibility of attaining it is firmly fixed in the mind. Such conviction, which consists of a steadfast belief in the supremacy of purity and goodness over desire and passion, is called faith. Such faith is the stay, support, and comfort of the man who, while yet in the darkness, is searching earnestly for the light, which breaks upon him for the first time in all its dazzling splendor and ineffable majesty when he enters the shining gateway of meditation. Without such faith he could not stand for a single day against the trials, failures, and difficulties which beset him continually, much less be courageous to fight and overcome them, and his final conquest and salvation would be impossible. Upon entering the stage of meditation, faith gradually ripens into knowledge, and the new regenerate life begins to be realized in its quiet wisdom, calm beauty, and ordered strength, and day by day its joy and splendor increase. The final conquest over sin is now assured. Lust, hatred, anger, covetousness, pride and vanity, desire for pleasure, wealth and fame, worldly honor and power, all these have become dead things, shortly to pass away forever, for there is no life nor happiness in them. They have no part in the life of the regenerate one who knows that he can never again go back to them. For now the old man of self and sin is dead, and the new man of love and purity is born within him. He has become, or becomes, as the process of meditation ripens and bears fruit, a new being, one in whom purity, love, wisdom, and peacefulness are the ruling qualities, and wherein strife, envies, suspicions, hatreds, and jealousies cannot find lodgment. Old things have passed away, and behold, all things become new. Men and things are seen in a different light, and a new universe is unveiled. There is no confusion, as out of the inner chaos of conflicting desires, passions, and sufferings, the new being arises. There arises in the outer world of apparently irreconcilable conditions a new cosmos, ordered, sequential, harmonious, ineffably glorious, faultless in equity. Meditation is a process of both purification and adjustment. Aspiration is the purifying element, and the harmonizing power resides in the intellectual train of thought involved. When the stage of meditation is reached and entered upon, two distinct processes of spiritual transmutation is reached and entered upon. Two distinct processes of spiritual transmutation begins to take place, namely, 1. Transmutation of passion. 2. Transmutation of affliction. The two conditions proceed simultaneously, as they are independent, and act and react upon one another. Passion and affliction, or sin and suffering, are two aspects of one thing, namely, the self in man, that self which is the source of all troubles which afflict mankind. They represent power, but power wrongly used. Passion is a lower manifestation of a divine energy, which possesses a higher use and application. Affliction is the limitation and negation of that energy, and is therefore a means of restoring harmony. It says, in effect to the self-bound man, "Thus far shalt thou go, and no farther." The man of meditation transfers the passional energy from the realm of evil, self-following, to the realm of good, self-overcoming. Today he reflects, tomorrow he overcomes his passions, and the third day he rejoices. The mind is drawn from its downward tendency and is directed upwards. The base metal of error is transmuted into the pure gold of truth. Lust, hatred, and selfishness disappear, and purity, love, and goodwill take their place. As the stage proceeds, the mind becomes more and more firmly fixed in the higher manifestations, and it becomes increasingly difficult for it to think and act in the lower. And just in the measure that the mind is freed from the lower, violent, and inharmonious activities, just so much is passion transmuted into power and affliction into bliss. This means that there is no such thing as affliction to the sinless man. When sin is put away, affliction disappears. Selfhood is the source of suffering. Truth is the source of bliss. When the unregenerate man is abused or slandered, misunderstood, or persecuted, it causes him intense suffering. But when these things are brought to bear on the regenerate man, there arises in him the rapture of heavenly bliss. None but he who has put away the great enemy, self, under his feet, can fully enter into and understand the saying, "Blessed are ye, when men shall revile you, and persecute you, and shall say all manner of evil against you falsely, for my sake. Rejoice, and be exceedingly glad." And why does the righteous, regenerate man rejoice under those conditions which cause such misery to the unrighteous, unregenerate man? It is because, having overcome the evil in himself, he ceases to see evil without. To the good man, all things are good, and he utilizes everything for the good of the world. To him, persecution is not evil, it is good. Having acquired insight, knowledge, and power, he, by meeting that persecution in a loving spirit, helps and uplifts his persecutors and accelerates their spiritual progress, though they themselves know it not at the time. Thus he is filled with unspeakable bliss, because he has conquered the forces of evil, because instead of succumbing to those forces, he has learned how to use and direct them for the good and gain of mankind. He is blessed because he is at one with all men, because he is reconciled to the universe, and has brought himself into harmony with the cosmic order. There is at first the underworld of lust, darkness, and death, which is associated with ignorance. Rooted in this is the foot of the cross, desire, in the body of the cross. Desire branches out into two arms. The right, active or passive, are passion, being equalized and balanced by the left, passive or negative, arm of affliction. Uniting these and rising out of them at the head of the cross is aspiration. Here, wounded and bleeding, rests the thorn-crowned head of humanity. At the end of this, and right at the summit of the cross, is knowledge, which, while being at the apex of self-life, is the base of the truth life, and rises above the heavenly world of love, light, and life. In this supremely beautiful world the regenerate man lives. Even while living on this earth, he has reached nirvana, the kingdom of heaven. He has taken up his cross, and there is no more sin and sufferings. Desire and passion and affliction are passed away. Harmony is restored, and all that is bliss and peace. The cross is the symbol of pain. Desire is painful. Passion is painful. Affliction is painful. And aspiration is painful. This is why these things are symbolized by a cross, which has two pairs of conflicting poles. Affliction is the harmonizing and purifying element in passion. Aspiration is the harmonizing and purifying element in desire. Where the one is, the other must be also. Take away the one, and the other disappears. Suffering or affliction is necessary to counteract passion. Aspiration or prayer is necessary to purge away desire. But for the regenerate man all things are ended. He has risen into a new life and a new order of things, the consciousness of purity, lacking nothing and being at one with all things. He does not need to pray for anything, redeemed and reconciled, contented and at peace. He finds nothing in the universe to hate or fear, and his is both the duty and power to work without ceasing for the present good and ultimate salvation of mankind. End of Chapter 1. Recording by Andrea Fiore. Chapter 2 of The Shining Gateway by James Allen. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Andrea Fiore. Chapter 2. Temptation. I know that sorrow follows passion. Know that grief and emptiness and heartache wait upon all earthly joys. So I am sad. Yet truth must be, and being can be found. And though I am in sorrow, this I know, I shall be glad when I have found the truth. The only external tempters of man are the objects of sensation. These, however, are powerless in themselves, unless they are reflected in his mind as desirable objects to possess. His only enemy, therefore, is his coveting of the objects of sensation. By ceasing to covet objects of sensation, temptation and the painful fighting against impure desires pass away. This ceasing to covet objects of sensation is called the relinquishing of desire. It is the renunciation of the inner defilement, by which a man ceases to be the slave of outward things and becomes their master. Temptation is a growth, a process more or less slow, the duration of which can be measured by the sage, who has gained accurate knowledge of the nature of his thoughts and acts and the laws governing them, by virtue of having subjected himself to a long course of training in mental discipline and self-control. It has 5 stages, which can be clearly defined, and their development traced with precision. But the man who is still immersed in temptation has, as yet, little or no knowledge of the nature of his thoughts and acts and the laws governing them. He has lived so long in outward things, in the objects of sensation, and has given so little time to introspection and the cleansing of his heart, that he lives in almost total ignorance of the real nature of his thoughts and acts, which he thinks and commits every day. To him, temptation seems to be instantaneous, and his powerlessness to combat the sudden and apparently unaccountable onslaught causes him to regard it as a mystery, and mystery being the mother of superstition, he may, and usually does, fall back upon some speculative belief to account for his trouble, such as the belief in an invisible evil being or power outside himself, who suddenly and without warning attacks and torments him. Such a superstition renders him more powerless still, for he has sufficient knowledge to understand that he cannot hope to successfully cope with a being more powerful than himself, and of whose whereabouts and tactics he is altogether unacquainted. And so he introduces other beliefs and superstitions, which his dilemma seems to necessitate, until at last, in addition to all his sins and sufferings, he becomes burdened with a mass of supernatural beliefs, which engross his attention, and take him farther and farther away from the real cause of his difficulty. Meantime, he continues to be tempted and to fall, and must do so by self-subjugation and self-purification, until he has acquired the ability to trace the relation between cause and effect in his spiritual nature, when, with purified and enlightened vision, he will see that the moment of temptation is but the fulfillment of those impure desires which he secretly harbors in his own heart, and later, with a still purer heart, and when he has gained sufficient control over his wandering thoughts to be able to analyze and understand them, he will see that the actual moment of temptation itself has its inception, its growth, and its fruition. What, then, are the stages in temptation? And how is the process of temptation born in the mind? How does it grow and bear its bitter fruit? The stages are 5, and are as follows. 1. Perception. 2. Cogitation. 3. Conception. 4. Attraction. And 5. Desire. The first stage, is that in which objects of sensation are perceived as objects. This is pure perception and is without sin or defilement. The second stage is that in which objects of sensation are considered as objects of personal pleasure. This is a brooding of the mind upon objects, with an undefined groping for pleasurable sensation, and is the beginning of defilement and sin. In the third stage, objects of sensation are conceived as objects of pleasure. In this stage, the objects are associated with certain pleasurable sensations, and these sensations are conceived and called out vividly in the mind. In the fourth stage, objects of sensation are perceived as objects of pleasure. At this stage, the pleasure as connected with the object is distinctly defined, yet there is a confusion of pleasure and object, so that the two appear as one, and a wish to possess the object arises in the mind. There is also a going out of the mind towards the object. The fifth and last stage is an intense desire, a coveting and lusting to possess the object, in order to experience the pleasure and gratification which it will afford. With every repetition in the mind of the first four stages, this desire is added to, as fuel is added to fire, and it increases in intensity and ardor, until at last the whole being is aflamed with a burning passion, which is blind to everything but its own immediate pleasure and gratification. And when this painful fruition of thought is reached, a man is said to be tempted. There is still a further stage of action, which is merely the doing of the thing desired, the outworking of the sin already committed in the mind. From desire to action is but a short step. The following table will better enable the mind of the reader to grasp the process and principle involved. 1. Perception. Objects of sensation perceived as such. 2. Cogitation. Objects of sensation considered as a source of pleasure. 3. Conception. Objects of sensation conceived as affording pleasure. 4. Attraction. Objects of sensation perceived as pleasurable in possession. 5. Desire. Objects of sensation coveted as such, desired for personal delight and pleasure. Every time a man is tempted, he passes from inaction through all the 5 stages in succession, and his fall is passing on into action. The process varies greatly in duration according to the nature of the temptation and the character of the tempted, but after much yielding and many falls, the mind becomes so familiar with the transition that it passes through all the stages with such rapidity as to make the temptation appear as an instantaneous, indivisible experience. The sage, however, never loses sight of the duration of time occupied in the process of temptation, but watches its growth and transition, and just as the scientist can measure the time occupied in the transition of sensation from the brain to the bodily extremities, or from the extremities to the brain, which ordinarily appears not to occupy duration, so the sage measures, though by a different method, the passage from pure perception to inflamed desire in a sudden experience of temptation. The knowledge of the nature of temptation destroys its power, or rather its apparent power, for power exists in holiness only. Ignorance is at the root of all sin, and it fades away when knowledge is admitted into the mind. Just as darkness and the effects of darkness disappear when light is introduced, so sin and its effects are dispersed when knowledge of one's spiritual nature is acquired and embraced. How then does the sage avoid sin and remain in peace? Knowing the nature of sinful acts, how they are the result of temptation, knowing also the nature of temptation, how it is the end and fruition of a particular train of thought, he cuts off that train of thought at its commencement, not allowing his mind to go out into the world of sensation, which is the world of pain and sorrow. He stands over his mind, eternally vigilant, and does not allow his thoughts to pass beyond the safe gates of pure perception. To him, all things are pure, because his mind is pure. He sees all objects, whether material or mental, as they are, and not as the pleasure seeker sees them, as objects of personal enjoyment, nor as the tempted one sees them, as sources of evil and pain. His normal sphere, however, is that of inaction, which is perfect holiness and rest. This is a position of entire indifference to considerations of pleasure and pain, regarding all things from the standpoint of right, and not from that of enjoyment. Is then the sage, the sinless one, deprived of all enjoyment? Is his life a dead monotony of inaction, inertia? Truly, he is delivered from all those sensory excitements, which the world calls pleasure, but which conceals, as a mask, the drawn features of pain, and being released from the bondage of cravings and pleasures, he lives without ceasing in the divine abiding joy, which the pleasure seeker and the wanderer in sin can neither know nor understand. But inaction, in this particular, means inaction as regards sin, inaction in the lower animal activities, which being cut off, their energy is transferred to the higher intellectual and moral activities, releasing their power and giving them untrammeled scope and freedom. Thus the sage avoids sin by extracting its root from himself, not allowing it to grow into attraction, to blossom into desire, and to bear the bitter fruits of sinful actions. The unwise man, however, allows the thought of pleasure to take root in his mind, where its growth evokes sensations which are pleasant to him, and on these sensations he dwells with enjoyment, thinking in his heart, so long as I do not commit the sinful act, I am free from sin. He does not know that his thoughts are causes, the effects of which are actions, and there is no escape from sinful acts for him who dwells in sinful thoughts. And so the process develops in his mind and blossoms into desire, and in the final moment of temptation, which is but the moment of opportunity brought into prominence by that desire, with the coveted object at his unreserved command, the fall of the man into sinful action is swift and certain. End of chapter 2. Recording by Andrea Fiore.